over here and there's always an S inside of it. And you can see those two rectangles, which means that sections can be placed on top of each other, like you can see in this example over here. So sections are kind of like the big blocks that build up the length of a page. So if you take a look at my portfolio website, for example, what you can see is one big section over here. This could be a section, this could be a section, this could be a section. So these are the main blocks that build up a page. Now columns are always inside of sections, and I've illustrated them right here with the purple dotted line and a C inside of it. And here I've placed the rectangles on the side because columns can only be stacked horizontally. And any content that you're gonna put in your website is always inside of a column. You cannot place content inside of a section. You always need a column to put something inside of it. So every widget that you drag out of Elementor, you're gonna put that in a column that is part of a section or an intersection. But more on that later. So what you can also see in this example is that the column is not as wide as the section. The section right here is full screen and the column is not. This is important because everybody has a different screen. So if the screen becomes bigger, then the section will stretch up and the columns will stay the same. By default, Elementor main columns are 1140 pixels wide and the sections are as wide as the screen gets. And those 1140 pixels are of course on a desktop. So let me show you an example here. This is one of the client websites that I have designed. And as you can see right here, this whole artboard is 1400 wide, but the main content, like all the elements, as you can see from the menu to all the images, are all inside of this main grid. And this main grid is 1140 pixels wide, and that makes this design perfect for Elementor. So you have some elements in the website that are wider than that, for example header images like over here, but for images and background colors it doesn't really matter if it becomes a bit bigger or a bit smaller, but the content needs to stay on its place. So that's why all the columns have a fixed width. Okay, so let's go back to the columns. Like I said before, the columns can be stacked horizontally, so they are next to each other. So let's say that you want to make 2 rows of columns, something like this. That is not possible. Why not? Well, because columns can only be next to each other and not above each other. That's why if you want to create a design like this, you have to do something like this. So you have to place the other columns inside of another section, and then if you decrease the spacing between all of these items, then you can make them close to each other. But this is not always what you want. Because for example, this is one main section that has a title, a text and some images. This kind of design is probably something you're gonna use on different pages. So you want to be able to copy this whole part, this whole section with one click. So then if you use this option, you have 2 sections or even 3 if you also put the title in a different section, which is not very practical for copy and pasting to other pages. So that's where intersections come in. So let's go back to an empty section with one column inside of it. What you need to do is then insert an intersection. And then in that intersection, there are 2 other columns, because by default, if you drag in an intersection, then it automatically has 2 columns. So let me show you what I mean. If you create a normal section, so a main section, you will only get one main column. This is a column and this is a section. If you drag in an intersection, like this, inside of that column, you will always get 2 columns inside of that intersection. So that is what you can see right here. And with this design, you can stack columns on top of each other in one main section. So for example, if you wanted to create this design, then the structure behind the scenes in Elementor looks a little bit something like this. So you've dragged one intersection inside of it, you've duplicated one of those inner columns, so then you have 3 columns inside of that intersection, and then because sections and intersections can be duplicated on top of each other, you just make a duplicate and now you have 2 intersections with both 3 columns. And in this way you have a 6 grid inside of one big section that you can copy to another page. Or for example, pick this whole section up and then drag it a few positions up on the page. And the beauty about columns is that you can adjust them. So for example, if you want a design that looks a little bit something like this, you can do that. You just delete one of those columns and you change the width of the column. So let's see a real example here. So here we have one intersection inside of a main section with a column. You can easily duplicate this, right click and then duplicate. If you then duplicate this one, you have those two inner columns. If you then delete one column again, as you can see now they become center, but you can drag like this and put it at 33.3. And in this way, you have something that looks a little bit more custom. So I've used that on my own website. As you can see, this is part of my about page. And if you click on this, you can see that this is the main column. Then there's an intersection with two columns. And here are three columns, but I've just left one column empty, and that makes it look like this. Very nice. So now you know that you can stack sections on top of each other and columns next to each other. But this also means that you can duplicate the main column, as you can see right here. So if you do that, then you have two columns with both two intersections inside of them. So with this, you can create something that has a lot more possibilities. I've done that, for example, with this website, which is a magazine website. As you can see right here, here is my main section, and there's this column over here and this column over here. And inside this column, there's also another intersection, as you can see right here. So in this way, you can create a much more complex design than just the normal basic layouts. Okay, so now we've covered this first part. Now let's talk about margins and paddings, because if you understand margins and paddings, you can customize the design to make it look really creative, to create overlap effects and things that just look way more cooler. So let's get started. Like I said before, the content is always inside of a column, and you always have space inside of an element and outside of an element. Like for example, if you have a nice coat, there's also special padding on the inside. That's how you can remember it, right? So the padding is the inside, the margin is the outside. So that's everything outside of a specific element. So a column also has an outside and an inside. And the inside space is the padding and the outside is the margin. And this is also true for the section, the inside padding and outside margin. And this also is the same for the other elements. So if you apply 30 pixels of margin bottom to the top element, then in total there will be 60 pixels between the button and the element above it. So now it's going to become fun. Let's go to a few realistic examples. So you can see the simple design over here. Title, text, button, a background and an image. So let's say that we want to create a design that looks like this, where you have this cool overlapping effect. So first, let's take a look at what's already happening here. The left column over here, with the text in it, has a padding of 30 pixels on all sides. That's why there's enough space around the elements. So let's first put the image a little bit down. So how you do that is by adding margin on top, because that will push the image down. Then if you want to push the image to the left, you need to apply margin left, but then a -1. So here it's -150 pixels, and that will drag the image to the left. And then we have a problem with our text, as you can see. So what you then need to do is add more padding on the inside of the left column where the text is. So that means that the right padding of that left column will be more than the top, left and bottom. And then you will get a design like this. So let's first start with a simple design. I've tried to recreate a few designs that you maybe have seen in the video, how to know if your design can be built in Elementor on WordPress. As you can see right here, I have managed to create this simple design. So let me show you how this is made. So first of all, you can see that there is a main section over here. This is a section. Then there is a main column here in the background. And then there is an intersection just for these two text layers. Then there is another intersection which contains these three columns. And then for these images have an already applied shadow that I created in Adobe XD, but without any styling, it would look like this. So what I need to do right now is I need to change a few things in the margin, because we want to change the outside of this dish. So in order to change this, what you can do is just click on the minus left, and then let's see what happens. And as you can see right now, this image directed to the left. So I'm gonna put this at 60. Now we wanna move it to the top. So we're not gonna use top, but we're gonna use minus top. And that way it moves to the top. So for example, let's try -80. That's already a little bit better. Let's try this. Let's try 140. This is already overlapping the column right now. And then I only need to do a little bit to the bottom, maybe -70. And yes, as you can see, this already looks pretty nice. This flowing effect, by the way, if you want to know, that's part of the hover effects that you can find right here. It's called Bob. So that's pretty cool. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so this is a little bit more complicated. So what have I done here? Again, we have the main section over here. We always start with a main section. Then we always start with a main column, which is this one over here. And then what happens over here? There's an intersection. So I've just dragged one intersection inside of the main column. And this intersection has two columns. 1, 2. In the right column, there's one image. In the left column, there's an image, a title, text, 2 buttons, and a background color. So by default, a column doesn't have a background color. So you can set up the background color right here, as you can see. So that is what I've also done for the background column, as you can see. And in this way, we have 3 layers on top of each other. And what I've also done to create this is give this intersection a width. Because by default, it's gonna be full width inside of the main container, so that is 1140 pixels. But we don't want that, because we want something that's a little bit thinner sometimes. So that is where I use the content width. So you can give a width to all of the content inside of a section. You can also do that, by the way, for your main section, if you would like. But that is already set at boxed, and as I said before, boxed is always 1140. Now there's one more thing that I want to show you in this design, and that is that there are 2 buttons next to each other. And this is not done with another intersection, because you can only place one intersection inside of a main section, but you cannot place an intersection inside of an intersection. So you cannot go that deep. If you drag in an intersection like this, as you can see, it will try to put it under that main intersection, but not inside of this intersection. That's not possible. So what I did here is a little trick. So I've just imported a button, and I went to advanced and then positioning. And then in positioning, this is normally on default. You can put it at inline, and then if you put this button also on inline, then the items can be placed next to each other. And then the only thing that I did is add a little bit of padding over here or margin to create a little bit of space between these 2 buttons. And I've applied a cool hover effect. So as you can see, not very complicated to create, but it looks really cool. Now let's go on to the next one, which is the most interesting one. So I've recreated this design because in the previous video we took a look at this, and this looks really creative. So what I've done is I photoshopped myself in this image. Here is some proof to recreate this whole design. So how is this built up? Again, it's actually not that complicated. So it's just one main section. Then there is one main column, as you can see over here, that contains everything. The only thing that it doesn't contain is this background image over here. But that is just a background image of the main section. So what I've done, if you go to Style, Background, I've set up a background image that has this visual in the corner. Then if you put the position at bottom left, then the camera will always start from here. And then I've put this as cover, so it always stretches the screen. So when your screen becomes bigger or smaller, it will adjust. And in this way you have a cool background that interferes a little bit with the design. So then inside of here, there are 2 intersections. This is the first one, and it just contains this text and this image. This is just an image that I've uploaded, right? Because I've created that in Photoshop. So an image, a text, and there is just a little bit of padding, top padding on the inside of this column, as you can see over here, 80. And there's a lot of padding on the right to make sure that this text breaks inside of this column. Then there is the second intersection, which is this one. And this one has a lot of negative margin so that it can overlap the intersection that you can see right here. So if you delete this margin, this is how it actually is. 2 columns layout in an intersection, 3 columns layout in an intersection, and then I just tell this intersection like, hey, move up minus 180 pixels, and then I put the Z index at 2, and the Z index is kind of like the same thing as layers inside of a Photoshop or Adobe XD or any creative tool. So the more on top it is, so the one with the highest number is on top of everything. So here I've only 2 layers, so I've made this 2, and then this is 1, but you don't have to put this at 1, it automatically, I think it's 1 or it's 0 by default. So that's it. And here in this column there is just a background again, as you can see, a simple background and padding on the inside, 50 on all sides, so that it creates space on the inside over here. Then these social media icons that I created, which are vertical, are just an icon list without text in it. So normally there's text over here, I just deleted that text, it's just a list, and then I have aligned it to the right, as you can see, and placed it in this column. And then the only thing that I did, which I didn't show you yet, is I put the vertical alignment on the bottom, because you can use padding and margin for everything if you want to, but that is not best practice, because if you just want to put something at the bottom, then you have to guess with all those pixels. It's not a very nice workflow. So what you can do then is just put the vertical alignment at the bottom, and then all the elements will start from the bottom, and then you can add a little bit of padding if you want to, but that makes your life a lot easier. So that is the vertical alignment. Create a new column, and sometimes that's not what you want. So for example, if I change the width of this column, then the size of this logo is gonna change, and you want to keep your design consistent. So if you're done with something, then you want to keep it that way. So in this example, this column is 19.3%, and then it's perfect for the logo. So then if I create a new column like this, add a new column, then you can see that all of a sudden everything changes. That's not what I want. So then you can go back to your column and set the width over here back to your 19.3, and in this way you can keep the same design as you want. Of course, you can also just use your mouse like this and change it up, but this is a feature that you use very often. Also, for example, with this, these 3 columns over here are all 33.3. So there's also a little trick over here that's called structure. If you don't want to type in the numbers, here are a few basic layout to choose from. So a 3 column layout is this first one, then it automatically has that width. Like I said before, you can give columns background, as I've done over here. I've done that with a color, but you can also give it a background image. So for example, with a design like this, you can give the whole column a background image, and then you can still place items on top of it, because it's not a very good practice to just use an image and then add text over here and then add negative margin to the text to make it on top of your image. But you can also set up an image as a background, and then every element you put inside of this column will automatically be on top. So that is how that works. So if you can use the background feature over here, that's better than using negative margins to make things on top of each other. Okay, now here's one thing that I don't really like about Elementor, and that is when you have a design like this with a 3 column layout and you want 20 pixels in between all of those sections. How can you do that? I haven't found a solution yet. So the most obvious thing that I see most people do is just give every column a 20 pixels right, for example, or 30 or whatever you want. But the problem with this is that there is some space over here, which means that your website is not perfectly aligned to the grid. And this can make your design look less professional because it's not very good aligned. And another solution that I see some people do is just add padding on the left over here, like this. Let's put it on the left, and then just delete the padding on this middle one. But then the problem is that this block is bigger than the other 2, so that also doesn't work. So what I always do is I do a little bit of math. So let's say that you want 20 pixels between those columns. What I then do is I just go to the margin, and for example I do 14 over here and 7 over here, also 7 over here, and then 14 over here, because 7 plus 7 is 14. So that means that this block is 14 pixels less wide. But that's also true for this block and this block. And in this way, it's perfectly aligned to the grid, and there is 20 pixels, actually 21, in between. So it's not perfect. You can also put 6 and 6 over here if you want that, but then this box is 2 pixels less wide, so it's also not perfect. So I don't really have a solution for this, unfortunately. If you want 30 pixels in width, then it's easy. You just put 20 over here, 10, 10 and 20. Now this is perfect. So again, if you have a better solution than this, please let me know, because I'm not sure. But this is the best solution that I could find for this problem. And if this still is a little bit too much for you and you don't really feel confident, then you can use the navigator. So if you right click anywhere inside of Elementor, you can get the navigator over here. And here you can see everything. So you can see the hierarchy. This is the main section, this is the column, and then it also will be selected. So in this way, you can almost never lose where you are, because you can simply see the hierarchy over here. And you can even give every section a name if you want to. So this section, for example, is a story. So you can just double click on the name, you type in story, and you can click on them and then really easily navigate through the website. And you can even drag and change the position of each section over here. It really makes your life a little bit nicer. What you can also do, which is really cool, is hide elements on mobile. So now we've only talked about desktop, but let's say on mobile I don't want to show these two images because I don't know which one to choose and I just want to hide them. So what you can do is you can go to mobile mode, you can click on your main section. I've already done it, as you can see, because it's turned gray. You can go to advanced, you can go to responsive, and you can click on hide on mobile. And this will just hide this whole thing on mobile. You can also do that on tablet if you want to. So that is also cool. What you also can do, which is pretty cool, is switch position. So for example, if I want to first show the images on mobile and then the text, which is something that you want a lot of times on mobile, you can go to that same window over here and then click on reverse columns. So if there are 2 columns inside of this intersection, which is true for this website, because take a look over here in this intersection, 2 columns, right? Go to mobile and make sure to put this on yes, and then it will first show the images and then the text. And then you can see that you need to add a little bit of padding over here to give it a little bit of room, but those are details. And then the last thing for responsive mode, which I want to show you, is that you can reset the settings on mobile if you want to without affecting the desktop. So for example, I have 60% of padding on the right over here, which puts all this text on the left. Then if I go to mobile, normally it would look like this. Now I can just unlink this and adjust the padding for mobile without that it will affect the padding on desktop. So that is also pretty nice. Okay, now let's go to the last part of this video, which is called so when to use what. Because padding and margin still is kind of similar, right? So what you want to do is understand the basics and then add your own variation on top of it. So what you need to know is that Elementor wasn't really built for designers. It's more for like half designers that don't want to spend a lot of time on the details. So they have tried to help us, but they have applied a lot of